So tonight's meeting is on the subject of IBC, the International Broadcasting Conference. This is a 50-year-old conference this year. It's held now in Amsterdam. It was held, Stan might remember, back in the day there it was headed in, where was it now? Brighton, UK seaside town. I knew that was in my head. And it's really grown. I don't know, do we get attendance numbers from this year? Do any of you guys happen to know?
I've got them.
Oh, so Mr. Steckler will be sharing those with us a little later. Anyway, it's held in Amsterdam at the Rise Center. It's a huge, huge facility, and we fill it very thoroughly with this industry. Some people call it the NAB of Europe. It's kind of that and kind of different. It's certainly equally of similar magnitude. There's an exhibition for vendors of their products. There's a technical conference. And this year there was a very, very, very exciting thing that our second presenter will tell us an awful lot of detail about. It's always wonderful to go to Amsterdam. If you've never been to IBC, it's worth a trip. If you've never been to Amsterdam, that's worth a trip. Only because the Dutch have a peculiar sense of humor. So for example, Dutch frites are very, very popular. And one of the most popular places is this little place called Manneken Pis. And if you look at their logo, you'll see it's self-explanatory what the logo means, or what the name means. They're actually Flemish, it turns out, frites from Belgium, that's right. But anyway, at the end of the day, only the Dutch have that kind of sense of humor. So it's well worth a trip to Amsterdam if you have the chance. Anyway, so tonight we have 7 presenters, people who work in different sectors of our industry. We have people on the design engineering side. We have people in the C-level offices. We have some operations executives. We have a real breadth of people who know their stuff. And what we've asked them is come and talk for 10, 15 minutes maybe. No more than 15, please, because we've got 7 of us, about what you saw at IBC that was of interest to you. Tell us maybe why it's of interest to you or why it's of interest to the industry at large, and what you saw and what your impressions were. Don't really want just a report on what was at IBC. We can all go on the web and read that bump from different vendors. What I think is important here is we bring the Canadian, the local, and the collaborative, collegial perspective of people we work with and work in our space. So, to that end, and with apologies, we apparently do not have a very well working phaser here to change the slides. So I will be advancing slides, so all presenters be aware. You need to give me some kind of cue, whatever you want that to be, whatever your safety word is, and I'll change the slide. The other thing I'll ask you, because of, and I apologize to everyone, one person sent me a 2-page bio, one person sent me a 4-word bio. Accordingly, I'm going to ask presenters to stand up here and tell us in 10 or 20 words all about yourself and then carry on with your life. So up first, and maybe I'll make him drive his own slides here, is Stan Moot of the IABM. Stan?
There we go.
Would you like to get up here? Did you have a presentation of some kind?
Oh, I'm just going to toss the video there.
Okay. Which one
going
first?
So I'll just do the showcase one first.
Showcase one.
So I'm going to, first of all, I'll introduce myself. You want to pause that? No.
Sure.
There we go. I'm Stan. There we go. I've introduced myself. How's that sound?
Where are you from? Stan from Don Mills.
That was Stan from Don Mills. There we go. I've worked with Paul far too long. What can I say? So what I did want to talk about was one of the big things we had. I'm with IABM, and one of the big things that we put together.
Sorry, Stan. Who's IABM?
Yeah, who's IABM? That's right. So if you don't know who IABM is, it's the trade association for most of the vendors in the business. We have I think about 550 different organizations that are members. So we're also a partner at IBC, so we're heavily involved in the conference sessions as well as the shows. And one of the things we put together with AIMS, who you may know about, and 9 supporting organizations, was a thing called IP Showcase. For those of you that were at NAB, you probably saw it there. So I put together a little video on that, and just so you can get an idea what it's looked like. And Paul's even coherent speaking in this one.
Well, Mike, I think the whole IP Showcase team pulled it off.
It was an amazing amount of teamwork. It was a fantastic result. 52 companies, 9 sponsors, 1,958 leads. That's double over what we had at NAB. 25 reference sites versus 10. It really shows the momentum and the power of what we're doing.
Yeah, and I thought it was great that we just weren't showing Interop this time. We had some real tangible product running.
Paul, in the IP Showcase has certainly progressed from last year at IBC.
Quite the evolution, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Now tell us, I mean, now that 2110, -10, 20, and 30's approved standard, what are you showing here?
Well, so we're showing more of the same and a whole bunch of new stuff as well. So first of all, this is our interoperability wall. What we're showing here is the ability to get between SDI and 2110 using gateway devices. This is a key part of the evolution of 2110, is the ability for people to evolve rather than have to tear down and rebuild things. Yeah, so we have gateway equipment all the way from modular equipment right on down to stuff based on SFPs right in the switch. And this equipment provides both encoding and decoding of 21 to and from SDI. And on the monitors, what we're showing then is the result of every encode-decode process through the network back to SDI. We're running 5 different network vendor switches here, and we're running a pair of redundant networks linked across to the other side, which you'll see soon, with 100 gigabit. Most of our interfaces are running 10 gigabit commodity fiber interfaces. We're again showing the existing SMPTE 2059 PTP-based standard for synchronization. That's the synchronization that's running the entire demonstration here. And we have a specific demo showing some of the finer technical points of that. We're also showing some test and measurement equipment, both network and essence analysis gear based on SMPTE 2110. And perhaps most excitingly, we have AES 67 gear from the pure audio world demonstrating the absolutely transparent interoperability between AES 67 and SMPTE 2110-30.
Yeah, having that compatibility is extremely cool. It would be a real problem without it.
Well, you know, it's almost been since the analog days we haven't had that simple of an interoperability between those worlds, and this brings them back into the ability to build very, very rich systems using all of the richness of the audio environment as well as, of course, our television environment. So at our prior interops, we were demonstrating ISO4 as a new technology. The registration and discovery services are now an integral part of this demonstration, and every device on the network here is registered and discovered using the ISO4 technology.
All right, so that takes care of ISO 4. Now, what about this new ISO 5?
So ISO 5 is the next layer in the IS structure of NMOS. This is the control layer that builds on what happens in ISO 4 and allows a unified control API to be presented for all equipment, regardless of vendor. So this now gives us the ability to discover registered devices and then control them in a uniform manner.
So what about uncompressed playout?
So for the first time this year, we're now showing channel-in-a-box or playout solutions based on SMPTE 2110. These are products that everyone knows and uses with 2110 natively as the base interface. So these devices are all running playlists, playing out content into the 2110 environment, and we can also do ingest from 2110 into the devices. So they now seamlessly integrate with infrastructures based on 2110. So again, for the first time ever, we're showing a 2110-based production system. In here we have a full vision mixer, full monitor wall, signal monitoring and QC, replay, graphics, and an audio board. And this is actually a fully functioning production studio with 2 cameras, all of it native 2110, even right on down to the intercoms. So we're now demonstrating that you actually can build a full 2110 production environment for live production.
Now, how many audios can you mix in with this?
So 2110 can support any number of audio channels far beyond anything anybody could reasonably require. Because the streams are independent streams, you can pretty much go and fill your network with audio streams, so several thousand streams in a 10 gig network are entirely possible.
The IBC IP Showcase Theater was a huge hit. It was packed all the time. What were your impressions?
Well, you know, we put together 39 different speakers, and I was really surprised. I'd set the schedule to start right at the beginning of the show, figuring how are people going to get in or whatever, but we were packed waiting for people to hear the events. But I think the other thing was people read the schedule. They came in just to see specific things, whether it was end users or just a general go on IP.
Yeah, I noticed that. I presented a presentation 3 times, and the people sitting in the audience, they had a definite interest in what we're talking about. What about how do people, if they miss sessions or things like that, is there a way for them to get information or the presentations?
Oh, absolutely. They will be available on the IBM website. We'll put the link up here so people can get at them. The PDFs will be there, and on the first day we recorded all the sessions. And as well, if you want to go back to the NAB ones, you can get the hold of those too.
That's great. I think there's a lot of really good content, very educational.
Oh, now it's a good picture. Look at that, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm the winner.
It's a video.
I'm the winner.
Paul's the winner.
We've got 11.
There we go, Paul.
All right, so we're good there. So how do you want to do this? I've got a video on cybersecurity, another one on the future zone. We can do those a little bit later. I think somebody's going to be talking about cyber. Who is it?
Well,
Oh,
well, you know what?
yeah. Why don't we do that after and let Lee talk now?
Tag team it right now.
Okay, go ahead.
Tag Lee in, okay?
Yeah, tag Lee in.
Because Lee's going to talk to us about the 2110 stuff, because
Yeah.
everybody's going, what, what?
Yeah,
So
what's
this is, by the way, is a
2110
very
stuff?
big point of pride for SMPTE. This is a standard which is going to publish very, 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 very shortly. Biggest standard since STI. Lee Whitcomb, go ahead.
Slides? Not that it's that
So
exciting.
start
but-
talking and I'll get your slide.
Okay. So just out of curiosity, how many people have heard of 2110? And how many people know what 2110 is? Okay, that's like pretty good. Nope,
Wrong slideshow.
yes.
So, keep talking.
Yeah, so a few other things. So Paul and I were the technical lead on the IP showcase, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the standard and a little bit more details on the showcase itself. Sort of leading up to it, we had an event in Houston, so we had it was like 50 companies. They sent 100 representatives. We all sort of met in Houston for a week to sort of put all the equipment together to make sure everything worked ahead of time before we shipped it all off to IBC there. So just really quickly to look at. So there's several centers that all work together. I think sort of on Paul on the video sort of covered a bit. So we have the brand new standard here, which is SMPTE 2110, which is professional media over managed IP networks. And so that's the new, really big and exciting standard. We've been working on this for a while. It's covered in the next part, very, very close to being released. Then working with that, there are several other standards. So they actually sort of form a suite. So you don't just use 2110. You actually use sort of between 3 and 5 standards together to implement your whole system. So you've got the 2110, the 2059 Genlock one, which we've had presentations on before. So that's how you replace your existing Genlock over IP. And then there's the 2022-7, the seamless protection, which we've had presentations on before, which is how you do the redundancy. The 2110 gives you the essence. So that first one gives you the essence flows, then you've got the Genlock, then you've got the redundancies. That forms kind of the core basis of getting all your signals around. And then the other part on the control side is you've got registration discovery. So there's NMOS 04, which allows your devices to be registered on the network so your network knows about them. And then there's the brand new standard, or just soon to be a standard here, the ISO 5, which is for the connection management. So how you route camera 1 to monitor 1. So 3 of them have already been approved. So the system timing, the video, and the audio have all been approved, not published yet, but approved. And then the other 2 standards, which are sort of next in that suite, the traffic shaping and the metadata one, are very, very, very close to being approved. So they are so as a suite, the first 5 will be published very, very, very shortly, which is a pretty major milestone for SMPTE, because this will be sort of very important as we move forward. So you just saw in the video there, so at the showcase there was the theater part, which was packed. I mean, there were presentations running from about 10 o'clock in the morning till 5:30 at night. They took, I think, an hour for lunch, and it was pretty much packed the whole day. So this was just sort of an example of just one of the presentations. They were just like one after another. So it was quite impressive seeing all these people come to see these presentations. And as Stan was saying, people would sort of come for one. They obviously were looking at the program. They knew they wanted this topic, and they'd sort of show up at a very specific time. So this is kind of a, pan picture here, a little confusing there. But some of the key messaging at the IP showcase, sort of different from last time, was we were basically, like at previous sort of showcases, there was sort of gateway products or bits and pieces. The one really big message at this showcase was everything's available now. So you want to make a system, you want your camera, there are several manufacturers that make cameras. You want to do graphics, there's people who do graphics. You want to do servers, there's people who do servers. You want gateways, there's gateways. You want audio, there's audio. So pretty much any bit and piece that you need, someone makes it now, and they've been to the interop, so they all work together. So that was sort of the big message of this IBC, was where before it's sort of a technology, now it's becoming sort of real. All the bits and pieces are there. you can pretty much go out and start buying all this stuff now. So that was kind of the big message. And then we're also, I mean, as part of that, we're also showing like the production side. So it was kind of a mini little studio, but we're even sort of trying to show this time how you could actually, like, all the production equipment's there. So everything, again, to do that whole end-to-end workflow is now available, which is sort of the sort of big key message. Yeah, so we had sort of, the showcase was sort of divvied up into, there was a production area to sort of showcase, here's kind of the production workflow. As was sort of mentioned earlier, there was doing playout was kind of new, so we had a whole wall dedicated showing all the different sort of playout servers playing out. There was a wall on the showing the NMOS stuff, and the NMOS had just had a very recent workshop, so they were sort of showing their latest and greatest stuff. And then we had sort of this general interop wall, which was basically just showing 50 companies, A connecting to B, B connecting to C, just so you could see that there's lots of good interoperability on both the video, the audio, and the metadata. What was sort of also interesting about this showcase is at the previous NEB and IBC, we were out sort of on the show floor, so you'd have lots of sort of random people coming by. What was sort of interesting about this one is we were actually in sort of a conference room, and we were off, I mean, physically it was near the middle of IBC, but we were off in sort of this funny little hallway. And unfortunately, IBC, who was supposed to do some better advertising for us, didn't really do that as effectively. So what made it sort of interesting, and I sort of expected this, was we were sort of a destination. You didn't have some random person come. I mean, if you wanted to come there, you had to actually look at the map and ask people to find us. Like, it wasn't easy to find us. So everyone who showed up, and it was pretty packed, wanted to come there, which was kind of neat. So they weren't just sort of random people. They were people who actually had questions. They were people who were building facilities. They were people who were like really, really interested and made the effort to find us in our funny little hallway, which was kind of neat, because it showed that there's definitely a lot of interest now in the industry and a lot of like real projects going on. And we had the other wall in the theater there, which was basically showing real life examples. So where some people were thinking about it, there was, I can't remember what the number was, 24 or something. Basically, here are real deployments of people doing the video over IP that have really deployed systems that are really working, which was also sort of showing that strong message of this stuff is real and not just some cool technology. Was there anything else? Yeah, we had I think that's probably the key things on the showcase there.
What is the Imagine Communications presenter?
In terms of the speeches and stuff?
No, in terms of products and
Yeah.
developments.
Well, I mean, like, what's it? There were lots of vendors. I don't really want to highlight necessarily what we're doing, just to be fair to everyone, but we have a complete offering, so. Okay, next.
And we're going to actually bring everybody up and sit them down at the end so you can ask a question, maybe that's directed to 2 or 3 of them. No, you can ask your questions now. That's be done. It's Ward Beck, guys. Speaking of, oh my God, what happened when I did that? Anyway, so yeah, if you have a question specific to the speaker, ask it right when they're done. Otherwise, please hang on until the end, and then we can let several people try and answer your question. Just a little Canadian data point here on this. Spot the Canadian equipment on the table. So just to show how we're doing here, Ross, Everts, Ward Beck. Kudos, everybody. 3 Canadian products on an international demo of leading-edge technology. Very nice stuff. So next, I'd like to call on our good friend Jim Morrison, whose slides I will bring up here, and he will tell us what he thought about IBC. Jim.
Thank you. All right, I'm Jim Morrison. Consulting with Rogers and been there for 2 years for a 3-month contract, so it's going and going and going. Yeah, I went to IBC this year. Rogers as a group went with a specific focus. We were focusing on workflows and edit and production system replacement. So we walked by a lot of booths that I'd normally go into. We didn't spend a lot of time, unlike the last vendors, looking at IP because we've committed to an IP solution. We're just hoping it'll work now. So that's what we're going to do for IP. So here's my picture. Okay, Amsterdam's all about canals and water. This is the entrance to the metro there. It's below water. Right, so you're going down the entrance and you're going underground with the big canal sitting there. So I had to show that picture. So the things that we focused on when we were there, because we were trying to look at software applied solutions, we were looking at basically COTS delivery of applications on IP infrastructures. We were looking at cognitive and microservices, the difference between CapEx and OpEx trends. We were primarily also focusing on post-production tools. So I'm not going to talk any particular products because we looked at lots of products, but we primarily were looking at items with respect to these trends. Wrong way again. And as people have already noted, IP 2110 is here. There's a picture of it there. So some of this is meant as basically a talking point for myself. So a lot of the decisions of big projects that we're working at Rogers are based on applying a lot of these principles. Again, all IP, uncompressed IP, light types of clients. We're looking at software-defined processes, software-defined any types of processes. Clear end-to-end integration and orchestration, which has been touched upon earlier. Applications of VM and hypervisors in this environment. Tiered object-based storage, open standards, working in a shared media environment if we can, network security. And I gave you my perception on the end of where we're pretty well standing based on my observation. So yes, finally we're here for SMPTE 2022 and 2110. In terms of HTML and light-based clients, there's still a lot of heavy clients out there. COTS platform, and with microservices, it's growing, so it's improving. I still think the interoperability, although there's a lot of work, it's a little bit weak, so my perception is it's coming, but not quite there yet. Again, VM, yes, it depends. VM's good for some things, not good for others. Object-based tiered storage solutions, again, it's growing. And I'll get into that. Open standards, yes, better. Again, showing combined shared media environments is growing as well. And network security is recommended. So that's something to look at. Am I on the right one here? Yeah. So in terms of COTS and IP and applications, there's been lots of talk about everything should run on COTS. And we all know what COTS stands for. Common off-the-shelf type of hardware platforms over IP. This will also include storage systems, hierarchical storage management systems, object stores. We also looked at applications that are bare metal versus VM servers. And my perception is that a lot of the vendors provide both. Again, it's application specific. VM will work best in applications that don't do any heavy lifting per se, while bare metal is primarily needed with acceleration for anything that's having heavy lifting types of loads. HTML5 types clients, web-based applications, those are growing as well. Not too many virtualized desktops. Some vendors are providing virtualized desktop solutions. But in terms of HTML5, we're focusing on that because it allows any workstation from anywhere to get into your service environment without relying on a heavy client, right? So there's more, but not enough right now. Again, open standards, our big concern now is focused around interoperability on the control side. Yes, definitely Emma's working on releasing that. It's still coming. It's not quite here yet, but it's coming. It's our perception. And I've also ran into talking to vendors about streaming uncompressed video in the COTS environment over IP. There's still limitations under Windows. Some cases you have to do some kernel tweaks or you have to do some special modifications. So it's not quite off the shelf as we would think it would be, right? But it's coming. Lots of boxes, lots of software. Okay, cognitive and microservices. Cognitive services are services that provide a automated, intelligent extraction of information on content such as audio described. They'll do things like visual detection of logos, facial recognitions, and things like that. Microservices are services that are kind of made in a modular fashion, and you can connect them like Lego blocks to build your application, as opposed to a million lines of code. You write lots of little bits of code and plug them together to build an application. These are all being advertised or marketed as an OpEx or software as a service type of model, which, you know, people like IBM, Watson, and Google and Microsoft are offering these types of services, and they're basically pay-as-you-go services. And I ran into one vendor who was providing transcoding functionality in the cloud, and it's a pay-as-you-go, and I asked them, how long does it take for me to use this product before I can just buy it outright, right? 2 months, right? So there is a bit of analysis that's still needed to say, is software as a service is right for us? And I don't think we have the right answer for that yet, right? So that's something I've noticed as well. There's a push to that, though I haven't convinced ourselves yet that it's the right way to go. There's still dedicated programmable hardware being deployed, because hardware can still do things faster for less power than pure software-based environment. So there's multiple vendors that have solutions in that environment. And infrastructure as a service, everyone's aware of AWS, Azure. They'll be happy to sell you, compute resources or storage resources in the cloud. So everybody's exploiting all these environments today with their various solutions. And it's growing at IBC as well. As an example of cognitive services, these are both examples from two different vendors where they do, there was a lot of vendors pushing automated captioning, where they would do real-time video analysis and extract the audio and generate text in real time. So it's interesting, the one on the right is actually global television. So I was noticing walking through IBC, a global TV video where they're doing real-time extraction of the president's speech, right? And they were actually running it through in real time. There's a lot of delay, so in order to do it accurately, which is a condition of license for many of us, it could be upwards of 10 to 20 seconds delayed in order to process it and then put it. So less delay, more inaccuracy in the service. But that seems to be one application of cognitive. The issue with the cognitive with these applications is that they're also running in the cloud. So they run the video, you run the cognitive service in the cloud. So some of these are running on proxies. So they send them out to the cloud, run the service, send the data back, right? So that's an example of some cognitive services that could benefit us. Things that we focused on there was workflow and post-production tools. We were looking at, is there a better editor out there? We looked at most of the traditional vendors. We were also looking at to see if there's any HTML5 based editors. There are a few. But one thing we did notice significantly is that everybody seems to interface with Adobe Premiere, right? So Adobe Premiere seems to be a very popular tool that they're integrating into lots of workflow engines versus the traditional NLE back-end MAM and storage systems. In terms of MAM systems, they're kind of broken into functionality. We're looking at MAM systems and workflow that drives things through an action engine based on rules. And Elasticsearch, it should be capital S, is a kind of an open public domain search engine which people seem to be employing more and more of in their applications. It's in the back end. And interactivity. Something was interesting. I walked by a booth and it captured my face when I was standing there, and I could interact, and I became a cartoon. So that was interesting. That's Adobe. So that's what I saw in terms of the trends at IBC.
Jim, thanks. I don't need to. Can I? Oh, sure. Why not? So I'm just curious, because you're the first person to mention people publishing standardized APIs. What are you going to do with them? I mean, most people buy equipment and it's a panel and you set it up, you push the buttons and stuff works. So what would you build on top of APIs that frees you from buying a commercial
Well,
product?
the biggest thing I've noticed with the various vendors in terms of APIs is we're happy for the other vendor to work with our API. So I haven't heard anybody say, I will work with my API. So there's APIs out there, but I haven't seen anybody take on the ownership of having the interactivity supporting the APIs.
Right. I think the only successful control API ever in the industry is the Sony 9-pin DTR protocol, right? Despite simply standardizing several control protocols.
Yeah.
So then this is really just a tool to allow you to enable vendors to do better big system integration.
It's more of a case of, I guess, convincing vendors, requiring the vendors as part of a purchase to open their systems so that when we do the integration that we can have the information available across vendors.
Or in this case, don't open your system, use the standard API.
If there was a
Whatever's in your
standard,
back end,
yeah.
we don't
But
know.
I don't think there's such a thing as a standard API. They all have their own published APIs.
Right, but that's what NMOS is trying to do, right?
Yeah.
With the IS
Yeah,
standards.
yeah, for control. Yeah, because right now I'm finding with the vendors in terms of the multiple vendors is that even in the IP world, this is my perception because I've had to evaluate a whole bunch of vendors in order to make a decision to buy something last week, was a lot of vendors are looking at destination type switching, right? And in order to, in my observation and asking them outright is when they are trying to make a route to a destination device, the destination device has to be requested through an API call in order to make the join to make the switch, right? So that has to be standardized to make it interoperable.
Right,
So
that's ISO 5.
yeah, exactly.
So-
Yeah. So right until then, it's still a bit of proprietary.
So that might not be intuitively obvious to everybody. Right now, when we do a router switch, we switch a cross point from here to here on the
Yeah.
bus, right? Real
And the end
super
device doesn't
simple.
care, right?
Nowadays, with 2110, you actually have to inform the receiving device to tell the system to disconnect the stream it's presently getting and then tell it to request the stream you want it to request.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit
Yeah.
abstracted.
Yeah, and you can't do multicast all the time. The stream doesn't start until someone wants it.
Right, exactly.
So,
So very, very interesting.
yeah.
Very cool. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Cool.
All right. So next up then, we have my glasses and Sean Kelly. Where's Sean? Sean Kelly. To the blue light, please. And I think we got something in yours here, don't we?
You do.
I do. Would that be it here? Look at that. And please introduce yourself like nobody seems to be doing. Or I'll just say your name.
Absolutely. I'm Sean Kelly. I'm the EVP of Technology for Chorus, and what that really means is I go and find the money that the smart people need so they can buy things and put services in place. This was my second trip to IBC, and you know what? It's a real privilege to go there. I think it's a fantastic show, and it's a terrific conference. I spent most of my time in the conference rather than on the show floor. And so accordingly, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one product that I saw that I thought was really neat, and then talk to you about a little bit about cybersecurity. Oh, look at that. It actually worked for me. How many here, because we're in a world where there's kind of different vendors or different products that, maybe we weren't used to using in the past. How many people are familiar with the brand Arvado Systems? Is that a household name? There's about 8 or 9. I see Lori. Lori's probably an expert in this. Arvado is a 3,000 employee German software company that is a subsidiary of the giant Bertelsmann Media company. And then because of that, they are a sister company to RTL, which is a big broadcaster. And working at Chorus, we've known Arvado for about 11 years because our traffic and sales system runs on Arvado's S4M, as does Rogers, as does TVA in Quebec. About 7 years ago, I worked for CanWest, and a group of us were looking for MAM systems. And we looked at Arvado's MAM system. It's called VPMS. Isn't that just a marketing dream, coming up with a weird acronym like that? But we looked at it, and it was a decent system, kind of middle of the pack, and we ended up picking something else. And so in the subsequent years, every time I would go to NAB, Arvado would offer me the opportunity to have another demo of their MAM system, and I would find polite or maybe sometimes impolite ways to avoid that demo. So they were quite unique this year, and they said to me in a really quick run-on sentence, Sean, can we offer you one of our local German beers while you watch the MAM system demo? And all of a sudden I thought that was a terrific idea. And this presentation may suffer from the fact that I had a few of those German beers. So what they were showing was they took their MAM and they broke it apart, and they created individual products. And one of those products, which I thought was really neat, was an aggregation point for researchers, for journalists as they're doing their research into getting ready for tonight's newscast. So here's the product lineup. You can see that this was a MAM system. Now it's a whole bunch of different individual products. One of which is, just to Jim's point earlier, one is a MAM wrapper around Adobe Premiere. It's a neat idea. But the one I want to talk about is called Media Portal. And this is the screen running in the background. And essentially what it does is it allows you as a user to use this as your interface that you're then going to look for everything. So it is federated search. It is allowing you to look at social media. It's allowing you to look at news feeds. It's looking through your asset management system, whether it's theirs or a third party's. It's looking into archives. And so what the journalist does is selects. I want to use this particular piece from Twitter, and I want to take this archive footage, and I want to take this news feed, and I want to put it all together. And what you do is you put it into this piece on the right, which are called collections. And collections is just like shopping at Amazon, where you pick the different things that you're interested in buying, and you're moving them to your checkout. And your checkout might be you yourself using this as an interface, or maybe you're moving it off to the editor, or maybe you want to collaborate with somebody else. But a pretty neat looking interface. Open APIs, probably to Jim's point, they'll allow others to play with their API. I'm not quite sure how that all works. But I thought it was quite a neat evolution of where the newsroom is going. And they're not alone. They have competitors. And Ross has introduced social media into their Inception product. Anova is another German software vendor, and they actually partner a lot with Arvado, although they're not related. And they're more in the resource space. Delet is doing this. And Avid, which you probably all know iNews, but Avid's doing this as well with Media Central. So that was my neat thing that I saw on the floor that I wanted to pass along. On the cybersecurity front, there were a number of different sessions around cybersecurity. And in fact, in addition to what was in the normal program, there was a whole day set aside to talk about cybersecurity. And there was a number of different speakers, including speakers from here in Canada. NABA was well represented. Michael McEwen and John Lee both hosted sessions. Two speakers that really stood out for me. One is Paul Rosen. Paul's the former Chief of Staff for Homeland Security. And Dennis Noah, I'm sure I butchered poor Dennis's name, but Dennis is an interesting individual. He's the Chief Information Security Officer for Arqiva. Arqiva is a third-party broadcast company in the UK, so if you're watching over the air BBC, you're watching Arqiva. And what's interesting about, the reason I picked Dennis is because he is a former hacker who is now head of security, and Arqiva actually was hacked. So he had an interesting perspective that many people did not have. Paul talked about, who are hackers today, and he put them into different categories. Now, hackers to me, I kind of go back to when I was in high school, and I wasn't a hacker, but I had a friend named Fred, and he spells his name phonetically, P-H-R-E-D. And he was a hacker, and using his Commodore VIC-20, he hacked into Via Rail, and he changed the departure time of every train leaving Union Station by 10 minutes. And then he phoned them up to tell them that he hacked them, and they said there's no way that you hacked them, and he told them how, and then they acknowledged that he hacked them. But in my mind, you think about Matthew Broderick running around hacking things. The world has changed. There's all sorts of organized crime. There's nation states. There's some big players, and the threat level to us as broadcasters has really gone up quite a bit. And what Paul outlined is he categorized in Homeland Security 5 different types of hackers. There's the vandals. Those are groups like Anonymous, and what they want to do is they just want to be disruptive and cause some sort of grief to your plant. There's burglars. Those are people that are after money, so they're trying to rip off credit cards, or they're trying to rip off private information. They're the ones that'll deploy ransomware and lock you out of your systems. There's thugs, and so these are people that just want to knock you down. His example was North Korea and Sony Pictures. So when Sony got annoying enough, they just went and knocked them down. The spies, these are people that they want secrets, whether they be national secrets or corporation secrets, or they want intellectual property. And there's saboteurs, and saboteurs are groups that want to cause damage, and so they'll target infrastructure and water systems and what have you. And we've been hearing a lot about cybersecurity risks and a lot about hacks, and sometimes I think we have the mindset of this is a problem for IT departments and not necessarily a problem for broadcast engineering. But as we move away from SDI and more into IP systems, all of a sudden we are owning that problem as well. One of the hacks that they talked about quite a bit was the Tv Sank Hack in 2015. And this one's not as well known as some of the other more popular ones like Sony and Target. In this case, this happened in April of 2015, where all of a sudden all 12 of their broadcast channels were affected and taken off the air, and at the same time their social feeds were hacked, and a group calling themselves the Cyber Caliphate took over, and so people all of a sudden thought that ISIS had taken over. ISIS isn't smart enough to take over Tv Sank, but the Russians are. And so this was a Russian group they call themselves Fancy Bear or APT 28. And they're the same folks that hacked the Democratic National Conference in the US, or the same people that infiltrated the French election. And what they did with Tv Sank is they actually infiltrated their network in January of 2015, and they just laid in wait. They went in and they hunted around their network to see what they could do. They found some interesting pieces of evidence that helped them. For instance, the Tv Sank engineering department had a wiki. So when they found the wiki told them where to find everything that they needed to use, what kind of systems are in place, what services are there. They also found a few back doors in, and one was the cameras that Tv Sank were using were controlled remotely by a Dutch company, so they hacked the Dutch company to go in that way. So in total, they found 7 different ways to infiltrate this network. They made sure they knew the lay of the land and they knew how everything worked before they launched their attack 3 months later. They actually even had given themselves Active Directory control right at the system layer. And they ended up rewriting the firmware in the routers. So when they took over big time and created quite a big issue for them. For the impact for Tv Sank was they were off the air for 18 hours, but the repercussion continued and continued. They had to take they had to disconnect everything they had from the internet. They were using fax machines to send documents between different locations. Could you imagine? Like, how would you even find a couple hundred fax machines to bring into the building? The initial cost of this started out as €5 million just to deal with it initially, and then over the last 3 years they've spent $16 million just building their infrastructure back up. And so the end, I guess, comment that came from all of these different groups is, who's responsible for security? It's everyone. It's not just the IT department. It is the receptionist at the front door. It is up to every employee in an organization to make sure that they're challenging people as they're coming through the door or coming up an elevator. But there was a number of speakers that talked about the production environment in particular, because in the production environment, we are under tight deadlines and we're under terrific stress. There's an election happening and it's happening next week, and we need to get systems all set up and ready to go. And what happens is we end up putting workarounds into the production environment, and that becomes the risk. So do we have ad hoc internet connections that are not going through the main firewall? Do we have unpatched systems because we are afraid of what will happen if we patch those systems? And that becomes the number one issue for us. Another one is employees being susceptible to phishing. And so there was a lot of conversations at IBC about these issues. And the commonality was that all of the speakers that got up to speak believe that everyone will be hacked at some point. Every single company on earth will be hacked. It's not if, it's when. And so what are you going to do to make sure that you're actually ready for that event and you're starting to put systems into place? One that I thought was really interesting is hackers perform reconnaissance, and one of their main ways of doing reconnaissance is LinkedIn. And so if you were to look online for old Windows servers that are susceptible, then you plug that Windows server into LinkedIn, you will find dozens and dozens and dozens of people that have that listed, and maybe that's what they're running today, which is a real risk. A big point was also made around collaboration. The more that we can collaborate as an industry, we can provide each other with information that we need that is very valuable. And one of those points of collaboration is the digital production partnership, which is really about how can you collaborate with files between different organizations. And there's a whole stream that's going on around security in particular. And one of the troubles that all of us have is, we're subservient to the fact that maybe Fox has a security protocol and we have to measure up to it, or maybe HBO has a protocol and we have to measure up to it, and they may not ever meet in the middle. So what DPP is trying to do is create an environment where there's some sort of commonality between all different vendors in the production chain so that we can all be speaking the same language. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Maybe we'll just follow right along with Stan here, get him back up here for a second, because I think you have a little bit on this topic as well.
Sure.
You're going to speak, not just play a movie, right?
No, I'm going to do both.
Okay.
You can bring the movie up while I'm speaking.
I'll do
How's
that.
sound?
Okay.
So that was a Friday event for cybersecurity. It was by invitation, and fortunately you had a good invitation there, so you got to go. At some of the things we did a luncheon, and at some of the luncheon tables we had questions. And one of the questions that came up is, what is the first thing you do when you realize your company was hacked? And that was sort of interesting. I was with Del Parks, and he's the CTO and EVP of St. Clair, and he said, the first thing I do is I notify our board of directors. And yet other people would go, well, the second I know that, I'll pull off the internet connection. So, I guess it depends where you're going on that. Certainly, I recall sitting with Dennis at NAB, and he was just all of a sudden got a LinkedIn request, and he went, oh, somebody's trying to hack into me again. So there you go. Anyway, this is just a little video. I had a chance to chat with Dennis at IBC.
Dennis, so you're obviously involved in the security side at Arkiva, but tell me about this. Is broadcast really any different than any other enterprise business?
No, it's not. It used to be different when it was an engineering world. With the move to IP and cloud, it's becoming the same. It is an enterprise business now.
So ultimately, beyond the legacy equipment where you probably want to have some extra firewalls and things like that in there, really it's just understanding standard enterprise policies.
That's correct, Stan. It's about understanding the policies and implementing them properly.
Right now, broadcast has typically been the Wild West because people are, in a rush, get the production out the door and things like that. So how do you change that mentality?
That's a very good question, Stan, because changing mentality is the hardest part of any human nature. The example I often give people, it's like smoking. People know smoking causes cancer, but they still smoke. The government increases the prices of cigarettes and people still do it. So what we tend to do, based in Akiva, is we've linked good cybersecurity to performance. We've linked it to pay. It's the same as people coming late to work and facing disciplinaries. So we don't really do the stick approach, but we take our people on a journey, we educate them, and we speak in plain, simple English. And people then understand the picture, and we try to explain to them that security is necessary for their job security, just as them doing their job properly and keeping the systems operational is necessary for my job security. So it's taking them on a journey. When you have a cyber attack, if you look at the likes of TalkTalk, they lost £100 million and 50,000 customers. Now that's a huge number for any telco to lose, where it takes 24 months to actually regain your investment of each customer.
Now, CFOs typically will see this as a cost thing and not so much as a benefit, but CFOs do understand risk management.
CFOs understand risk management very well, and the one problem we've had in our industry being cybersecurity, is the fact that we've spoken IT security. We haven't spoken board language. We haven't been able to say the so what impact. And I'll give you a typical example of that. Previously, when I took up my job, our KPIs used to be, I don't know, for example, 100,000 hits to a porn website. To a CFO, that means nothing, right? But when you can tell them that your workforce has spent 5,000 hours in a month on social media, and that lunch hour is only 1 hour a day, you've got 10 people, so I don't know, they should be spending, say, for example, 300 hours a month, then that's different, because they can then equate that to lost productivity.
Certainly a good way to look at it. Well, your presentation today was great, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks to the IBM for putting this up. It was really good. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So certainly cybersecurity is important, and it is a mentality thing. I think Dennis really pins that pretty well as far as that goes. And if you do want to see Dennis's presentation, like I said, is up on the IBM site. So who's next up?
I am.
You are.
Thank you.
Oh, well, let me introduce Paul.
Thank you. You're most helpful. Thank you, Stan. Now, this is the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. Nowhere in that name is the word audio. However, we do have an audio presenter tonight, so let's all be gentle and polite. I'm very pleased we have Anthony Kazoo from Wardbeck Systems. Also, Kevin Leiber is sitting, big hand up here for Kevin from Wardbeck. And Anthony also represents the Toronto section of the AES as vice chair. So tell us what you thought of IBC, Mr. Audio.
Mr. Audio. That is a terrifying title. Well, Wardbeck Systems, this is our 50th year, as it was the 50th year for IBC. So we were very excited to be a part of, the IP Showcase, as well as have the opportunity to present some of our new stuff at IBC. We were very fortunate to be involved with the Ontario Pavilion. The Ontario Pavilion featured a lot of companies who don't want to, it's a huge expense to go to these shows. So it was for us an opportunity to have a sliver where we could call home and hide my bag. So I hid my bag down there. It was very well attended. I would say the foot traffic was not the same as it was at like an NAB. There aren't too many fanboys at IBC, whereas NAB is a lot of guys who make a living off of commenting on people's technology. IBC, it's people who are too busy to create content to follow people who make content about the tools that make content. So that was very interesting. I'm going to skip a little bit about the IP Showcase, but IP Showcase, we were very much involved in the audio portion of the IP Showcase. So one of the blessings that has come about the SMPTE ST2110 is the -30 side of things, which makes it, for us, the AES 67 side of things. So it's very awesome to see this cross-pollination between video and audio in a common standard. What Wardbeck has been working on is the edge devices for this type of monitoring. Also, we have a microphone here. Well, how do you get that microphone onto the network? Traditionally, it's you go to a big, huge box where you have lots of gazintas and gazautas. But what we are working on are truly network microphone preamps where you just plug right in. So in order to work with some of this stuff, we had to work with multiple vendors to get all of this stuff. We also acted as a shelf for the Tektronix. What is that? So we're very happy. We'll provide you the rack ears. So anytime you need a shelf for your tech, we'll hook you up with that. Thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, it's cheaper than the tech rack ears, though, if you've ever bought those. It kept getting turned down. I'll be honest, the one thing about being at the production side of the IP showcase is I would be like, hey, I'm going to turn on this little bit of audio, and it would be like a little bit of music, and then 10 minutes later, somebody's like, shut that off. Nobody wants to hear audio here. But the fans, I wish I could reproduce the sound of all of these. It was being in a machine room, and then you have this little audio device that was making a little bit of noise. One of the things about the audio side of things that I can speak to is we had our own switch. So instead of using a huge Arista spine server, spine switch with multiple SFPs in it that converted it to electrical, what we did was we did a spine leaf, and we used an RTEL switch, which I'll talk about a little bit. So the RTEL switch was acting as a PTP boundary clock, but also as the thing that connected the electrical side of things instead of the optical side of things. So with the switch, a lot of these audio devices are gigabit ports. In our case, we use 100 megabit ports because we are dealing with 3.5 megabits of data compared to the 5 and 10 gig ports that some of these video manufacturers are dealing with. Consoles. There was a big shift towards remote production, the ability to put a device out in the field in the world and have it report back to you. So there were manufacturers who came out with remote boxes that then were acting essentially as switches for the field. Virtualization of consoles most certainly was a big thing, where you have a console that is running on a COTS box, and you also had tablets that are operating mixing consoles or that are adjusting some small piece of DSP someplace else. Very much the first full IP console. Like, this console didn't have any analog inputs. It was just all IP, AES-67 coming in and out. And again, the blessing of 2110 is that, well, it's 2110. Virtualized sound cards. There were a lot of virtualized sound cards for AES-67 playback and recording. There was a few. This was one of the devices that we presented because we believe that that whole mentality of 8, 16, and 32 does not make a network. If you have to wire everything to a single point, it's really not a network. It's just a network connection with a switch in between another thing. So this is a 2-channel microphone preamp. So in a situation like this, or out in the field, you're doing golf, you drop it, you add it to the network, and that's it. That is very much it. So there was Dante. Their whole thing is Dante is spoken here. So I believe that AES-67 is understood here. So we're very, very, very into that. Again, the Dash 30 was possibly the best thing to ever happen to audio and AES-67. There were deployments of AES-67 intercoms. Like I said, the full IP consoles. There are hundreds of products now, not just like dozens. There are hundreds of products, and that can include any Dante device that has the Brooklyn 2 chipset falls under the AES-67 umbrella. So as the Dante umbrella grows, the AES-67 umbrella grows with it. So that's a very interesting to follow. Of course, the control layer for AES, the yin to its yang, is AES-70, and that was really not showcased. So there weren't too many. I would have liked to have seen a lot more talk about the control side of things. This is something, in audio you have up and you have off. So let's all agree on those two controls, and this is very much what they're trying to do. And there's a lot more within that, but I won't talk about that. Multicasting audio. Everything is being multicasted, and what I found was a lot of vendors everybody has their own way to connect this source, to monitor this source to this source. So you had these topology monitoring softwares, and you had these virtualization. But you're just virtualizing a patch cable. So it's really it's a step backwards in the way of thinking, because we're that caters to those who come from the generation of past, not those who are moving into the future. So it's very interesting to see a lot of that. IGMP, for sure, the switches are doing way more work than we would like to give them credit for. The switch companies are doing a lot more for the routing of these multicast streams that we would like to give them credit for. So where now we have A1s and we have A2s, soon I truly believe in the audio side of things we will have like an N1 and an N2 who goes out in the field and is programming IP addresses into some small box someplace and being able to watch that type of thing. This is an Arista program. This is test access point aggregation, and it's a visualization of what's going on inside of these switches. You have a lot of command lines that like to hide things, not by nature, but by just that's the most efficient way to program these things. And a lot of these cloud-based solutions, they scale up and they do not scale down. So you're buying into a full suite of these really high-end cloud tools, but what you really want to do is just route audio. So that's a very tricky thing. What I'm starting to see is a lot more switch manufacturers and switch manufacturers who put their stamp on something and say, well, this is 2022, and then they say, well, 2110 coming soon. So for in the audio side of things, we have multiple devices that connect to a switch. So instead of using very expensive switches, like I said, there are these PTP-aware switches. So instead of negotiating with your grandmaster, you're negotiating with these switches. And there's a company called Artel, and there's a Belgian company called Luminix, who make these PTP-aware field rugged switches that are, the Luminix is power over Ethernet, and the Artel is just a standard off the shelf. And that's what we were using in the IP showcase to segment and to shape the traffic very much to the audio devices. Clocking of audio is absolutely huge. Now it's PTP. So if you do not have this tool, this is called PTP Trackhound. It is free. If you are doing anything with PTP, it is as disruptive as Wireshark is to like the vintage and Agilent protocol analyzers. It is a beautiful thing to see the delay send, the requests, and monitor your PTP traffic. It's by a German company called Meinberg. They released that at IBC, and it is free to the world. It is essentially a Wireshark that is wrapped with colors. But at the same time, that's what you need. You need quick visualization of this information. Again, patching, patching. How do you move this stuff around? How do you connect this thing to this thing? How do you agree upon this standard? Of course, the NMOS stuff, discoverability and connection. There wasn't too much in terms of audio connections being done because the video is obviously taking priority because that's where the heavy lifting is needed at the moment. So audio is, well, second to that. But if you have an NMOS discoverable stream and a receiver, very much that. Again, the IABM winner for design and innovation for control was a software called Animan by Merging. Again, another free piece of software where you are changing the stream receive, you're changing the receiver. So again, it's the whole IGMP problem of, you got to make before, or break before make. But this is a software that essentially, it sees all of the devices, audio devices specifically on the network, examines their capabilities and says, well, I can route this one to this one and this one to this one, and it changes the subscription of the receiver. But it also is a visualization tool of devices. So you have a visualization of how these devices are actually sending audio and connecting device to device to device. So it's kind of the hybrid between this topology, but it's not a topology. It is actually yeah, it's a connection manager more than anything. But again, free. Animan is just amazing, just absolutely amazing. There was a competing product to this that was released called the Dante Domain Manager. So Dante is an Australian company that just went public, and they had to release something that was, had a big splash, and it was very much a way to secure, the security, how to secure these networks, and how to limit user access to, changing things within, audio systems. They released it, but it is only dependent on certain products that support this certain chipset. So a lot of manufacturers have created all of these devices, and they're no longer compatible with their domain manager. So, one step forward, two steps back, vendor lock. You're tricked into some stuff. Again, the patch bay is totally dead, in my opinion. The embryonics way of plugging an SFP into a switch and having SDI is just absolutely terrifying. This is the back of the Timeline. I think this was the Timeline mobile. For an all IP based truck, they sure had a lot of gazintas and gazautas. So you're starting to see IP that is within a truck, but you're not seeing it as it's being deployed in the field. So you still have traditional infrastructure that is an asset that is being deployed, and you're not deploying networks out into the field with tactical fiber or anything like that. You're still seeing a lot of, even in the world's most advanced IP-based truck, you're still seeing a lot of coax and a lot of malts and stuff like that. So that was very interesting to see. So you're seeing it in these production environments, but you're not seeing it in the field. This is a product that we came up with. This is the breakout box over cat cable. So it's passive. There's no such thing. The wireman is dying, and it is a sad thing when it comes to audio, because now you can build everything on cat cable opposed to having somebody that's soldering. So the audio tech of the future is going to be doing a lot more subnetting than they are soldering. One of my hobbies, it's kind of a professional hobby, but I'm an RF enthusiast, so I do a lot of RF microphone frequency coordination. So one of the products that stood out most to me was the Narda IDA. So this magic wand has a compass in it, and you select the frequency you want to examine. You swing the wand around, and it plots it actually plots the pickup pattern of the transmitter, and then you can plot it on a map, and that blew my mind. It was just absolutely amazing. So I was very very happy to see that at IBC. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. And thank you, Ward Beck, for joining us here at the SMPTE meeting. Look forward to seeing you guys again, he says. So next up, we have Mike Johnson. Where's Mike? I know Mike's out there somewhere. And did I have something of yours here? I've completely lost track.
No.
I do not.
I'm just going to go off some notes, Paul.
Then you just get this in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is totally fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. So my name is Mike Johnson. I'm with Dome Productions based in Toronto here. We operate OB vans and also manage fiber network. And so my experiences from IBC, I'm going to go by my notes here that I've brought out. I didn't get to formulate this into a PowerPoint, unfortunately, so I don't get to sort of dazzle with pictures or some of the other text. But so far, it's been all great, and I get to maybe follow along. And Anthony, who has started to touch on a little bit of our world, and as I headed to IBC this year, one of the things that we got caught up in this year was building a mobile, and because we've embraced 4K and we're delivering 4K television, that became a bit of a focus for us. We found it awkward to get to the 4K solutions in some parts. We are operating 3 4K trucks now, but it was a focus for us going into IBC as to what could come next. And as we built this truck this year, we took a close look at trying to be able to do that in IP. And we could not find a way to sort of make it fit, particularly when we had to address 4K. There's lots of people who are building IP-capable trucks. As Anthony had mentioned, the Timeline truck that was in Amsterdam was a terrific solution for what they wanted to accomplish, and they were able to do quite a bit of IP in their infrastructure. It's not completely IP, it's not entirely, so they did sort of run into some of the same things that we saw as well. There's still a lot of traditional baseband stuff going into switchers, but the way that they had built it up was they effectively introduced a good portion of IP and took advantage of IP where it really made sense. So we're getting there, we're evolving, it's coming along. That's probably the most prominent thing that I really noticed, obviously, about this IBC. Everybody's been talking about it here tonight. It's IP is squarely in front of us. Why do we want to get there? It's the question that sort of comes to our mind, and that's the infrastructure of the future. That's where we're going to head towards. A lot of our interconnectivity is going to lead to a lot of different services. Some of the other presenters have talked about how we're going to end up on maybe like sort of more modular microservice kind of entities. And if I just shift a little bit to what I saw with the embryonics guys as maybe one example of the kinds of things that you can get now in that little simple SFP, they have so much serviceability across quite a wide variety of services. And it's really going to be something you're going to plug into a switch, and now I just have that connected service, and I can route to that service. What's going to make that possible? IP. It's not going to be SDI. SDI would require some other kind of a form of routing, but once you're in that IP domain, now I can send it to those services. We'll see that across some different software solutions as that starts to evolve. I think that one of the things, just to relate sort of our own experiences, and as I look at how IP, again, how it's going to help us, I keep discovering or finding different than maybe when we made the transition from SD to HD in our mobile live event world. We were really quick to jump on that because that visibility was going to be impactful for sports production. Same thing existed for 4K, and we could migrate to that. The step to move from SD to HD, the step to move from HD to UHD was fairly straightforward in that it really relied or used a lot of our existing technology. The step to make that leap into the IP space is a lot different. It's a much broader step. It's a bigger gap, I would say, to get there. And so because of that, I just start to look at it and I say, you know what, we may be sort of on the trailing edge of this transition. There's a lot of other industry environments that can make that leap into an IP space better than we can in our own world in producing live event sports productions in an integrated facility that really makes sense. Part of what we were looking for was to see, how is this going to redefine maybe operator solutions or even workflows flows for that matter in our space. One of the features or sort of serviceabilities that we look for is doing remote production style format. So I saw a couple of very interesting displays or presentations around this. There's an SVG event that happens in front of IBC, similar as happens in NAB. SVG is the sports video group. They're really a group focused on, particularly in our space, and they're a great advocacy group for a lot of things that we want to see developed, and just it's a very focused speaking group. And in the SVG event prior to the IBC days starting, there was a really good presentation from the folks from Net Insight and working with CalRAC in terms of a solution for remote audio. And the basis for that, what's sort of starting to evolve in this kind of working remotely, not necessarily just taking all the facilities right to your remote venue. It's to separate them, create a control room, kind of a production gallery back here, and maybe just cameras and stuff on site or audio pickup. But now there's even a different morph to that, in that there's solutions that are saying, you know what, maybe you just move the facilities there that are the mainframes, but you just put the operating systems back at a home base control space. And so there's a couple of really good examples of that. The NetInsight CalRec was a good example of doing control in one location, but the processing is taking place at the remote venue. Sony presented a solution that was really quite effective and showed control platforms at the IBC, but all of the mainframes for the devices that were linked in this complete production environment, including a server replay, a production switcher, and the cameras. The control was at IBC in Amsterdam. All of the hardware was in London area. Actually, I'm not really quite sure where the base is there, but it was, to say the least, it was across the strait, some miles away, and it was a 10 gig link that joined those together. The effective part of that is that the bulk of your baseband video switching took place over there, and the only streams that you were really transporting back to the IBC were the program outputs. That's really good, and it's not anything that we haven't been doing. But the effective control, the sort of the linking, the speed with which, if I did a dissolve or a wipe or anything, it was just immediate. There was no lag to it at all. So that to me is it's a really great step, and it's kind of points that it's a solution towards some of our evolving workflows as we try and find ways to produce our live content in sports presentations, entertainment presentations, all things that we want to do. So the idea of a remote production capability gives us another evolving sort of tier of service that we can offer and support, makes more programming possible, which is really what a lot of our customers are looking for. Multiple channels airing, lots of different original program. We have to start to produce all that, and I don't think that we're finding that budgets are getting necessarily bigger. It's just we're being called upon to do things, more things with less. Probably the other thing I noticed about the IP solution, and the IP showcase is terrific. I've seen that's maybe the third iteration that I've seen. It's truly gotten sort of big, glorious. It's a really nice, effective presentation. Probably unique compared to anything that has been done in the past. Had a great opportunity to sit down with one of the gentlemen from Arista, Robert Welch. Yeah. So in chatting with him, it was curious to me as these things follow. This is kind of the things that sort of tweaked my interest. Is that I just started talking about some of the interops that they produce and stuff, and just sort of considering what they would go through to make that coordination happen for what's turned out to be like a wealth of partners and people coming in to contribute to this environment and stuff. And he was describing sort of the conditions and all the things that you would do to sort of host something like that interop, and you get 5 days, so it's not like you got a lot of time to figure out why something isn't working. You just have to make it work because you want to be solving stuff in at 5 day period and stuff. So everybody come prepared and ready to make your stuff work in that environment. I take a bit of a message from that. It's going to be our leap into sort of that skill base, that understanding, that knowledge. Hopefully maybe a lot of this stuff is really already worked out for those of us who are going to try and put it into practical applications. So it's sort of what we look for, we hope for, but understanding that it's going to take a skill set and an advancement of knowledge, sort of new technician style. Anthony mentioned the different audio guys out in the field. There is that network guy maybe. I've heard other trucks are starting to have to carry that network technician. And so it's another part of what sort of I look for in terms of solutions to get to that end. And so there's a number of people, IABM are a group that support that education possibility. Media 180, there's other groups out there that are sort of helping those of us who are kind of in that broadcast environment and come from that direction to sort of make that move to IP understanding or clarity. Because I'm not on plug-in, this thing keeps going dark. One of the things that that has eluded us in terms of IP. And again, as you can tell, like our focus was really about IP solutions for our environment. Getting that ability to have or avoid or create that complete IP environment, not having to necessarily work through gateways or lots of devices that way. As we sort of build in our environment, we don't have the luxury of a lot of space, maybe even power and capacity that way. So we really need to keep it sort of trim and lean and stuff. And so the idea, the notion, the thought of having to add, a whole bunch of extra hardware based on just going in and out of SDI to IP back to SDI, it doesn't make sense. Unfortunately, you are going to have to do it, as you saw in the photo earlier, the back of that timeline truck, which again was a good implementation of IP. They did a really nice job on the interior, but you still have to interface to that outside world in a lot of ways. I think it'll be nice one day when we do get to maybe just you plug in your commentator monitors, the 4 you might have in front of you on your desk, and I just key in an IP web address, and boom, there's my ISO feed coming up, program feed from the truck. Maybe the font stuff is displayed. For now, we still have to do the, and in some cases, NTSC feeds around around venues and stuff. Is what we're strapped with. The devices that sort of came up for us that we run into in terms of our environment, we get a little bit sort of driven to work with certain platforms and stuff, and so the evolution of those things to migrate into the IP space. There's a lot of services or devices that are that can give you that complete IP environment, the live production, everything, mixer, switcher. Replay devices, except that for us it becomes a little bit more targeted in that we have to sort of pick certain platforms. Never considered that can't change, but for now that's kind of our lot in life. So one of the things that we look forward to is to see more of that evolution for pieces of hardware that we buy into. And so the production switcher that we tend to use, there's a movement on that front. It has now a new frame, an I/O. It's probably been the biggest limiting device in terms of production capability, just because of the 4K side. But that's effectively changing, and now we're seeing a frame, a hardware that is going to give us that higher capacity of inputs. So where we had on an HD environment 192 say inputs on the switcher with 64 outputs, when you went into a 4K mode, that got diminished down to 48 inputs if you're using all the SDI. So what's enabling that to go a little bit back up to the kind of numbers that we'd be accustomed to, maybe 192 4K sources. Seems a little bit far-fetched to me right now, but could happen maybe there down the line. IP is enabling that and the connectivity that's being offered there. So we're seeing a change in that environment, new frames for the switcher, and eventually a processing that will allow us to deal with full frame 4K processing through the production switcher. More devices with 2110. 2110 is maybe, I think it seems that a lot of manufacturers are purportedly ready for it. If they're not presenting it, they have their own IP interface that they continue to promote, but hopefully soon we're going to see that evolve to follow that standard. The release, since it's now approved, ready for publishing, hopefully there'll be a little bit more of that coming forward on some of our manufacturing sides. We have certain devices that are kind of waiting for that to happen, and so once a lot of that sort of falls in place, then we look forward to basically having that complete IP infrastructure built. That's how I look at it. The timeline is an interesting one. But it's an IP based on sort of servicing the multi-viewer. Some of the switcher inputs, they do a layering process. There was a couple of two switcher frames in there that actually they used to sort of effectively meet the 4K demands. With more IP connectivity from some of our contributing camera device partners that should improve. And I saw some of that. Maybe I can just highlight sort of one other part of that whole process in our environment, or our part of our the build out for what we would need to accomplish is on our replay side. EVS folks have introduced they have IP connectivity, but sort of speaking to the NMOS side of things and that control and that negotiation for exchange. As a good example, one of the tools that we see now that EVS are presenting is something that they call ScoreMaster. ScoreMaster is an overriding. It's like their API. It's like their control level. It's their interface that is actually going to make it now possible so that you can direct a certain input to actually look at a different IP stream and stuff. And so that control is going to be another significant evolution for our environments. To date, that's control for that kind of stuff is really largely set with a router and whatever application they gave you to steer the router to control that stuff. But now, sort of in a way that a lot of European companies have been operating already, you need a control system that reaches out and touches all different manufacturers of equipment and stuff. And so that became as much a focus for us in terms of some of what we spent our time looking at IBC. And there were a couple that really came to light. In the case of Formula One management and Timeline Truck, they both adopted Axon Cerebrium as a control platform, which presented them a lot of the functionality that they were looking for. In the case of Formula One, it wasn't so much IP as it was just reaching across multiple platforms. But in the Timeline solution, it was their most effective solution to negotiate a lot of the routing of the IP directions and routing that would need to take place. VSM is another product that sort of reaches across multiple platforms and stuff, and we saw that it has some promising capabilities in this space, but there's a lot to evolve yet in terms of sort of that choreographing or orchestrating across multi-platforms and bringing all these devices together. Ultimately, in the end, our focus is about that operator sitting at that station, and they really just want to still hit camera 1 to my channel 1 of my replay device and make that happen. And so we can create all the connectivity of IP, but we really, that orchestration will be important and has to be sort of complete and fully capable in terms of providing that interconnected. So those were a couple of the guys. There's some other players in that space that present some interesting possibilities down the road. But I think that's probably if we've kind of arrived at SMPTE 2110 as a interface for video audio, the control thing will be the next important step for us to evolve to. That's really that's the focus for our participation at IBC, and so thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Very nice. So, additional data points that once again we will fail at building an industry standard common control system. Mike just told us all the vendors are saying, "Oh yeah, no, pick ours. We'll talk to everybody else," which has been the story forever, and hopefully we'll have some common APIs which will maybe make life a little bit better here in that regard. So finally, and last and certainly least, I'm sorry, not least, is the voice we've heard from many times, but
Find my water. Is this my water?
define your water. You make your own water here, Mr. Steckler. A man who needs no introduction, but he will introduce himself, Paul Steckler, and will give us his take on what he saw.
So knowing that I was going to follow up from Paul, from Lee, from Stan, I'm going to show many of the same pictures and give you a very different angle on some of the things that I saw and some of my perceptions of IBC. Oops, it's advancing itself. What did I do?
Up arrow, down arrow.
So I'm Paul Steckler, the president of Applied Electronics. I was literally born into this business in 1958. I've been 35 years full-time. This was my 19th or 20th IBC. but I can't really remember because it is Amsterdam. So I'm also one of the 4 vice presidents of SMPTE, one of the 8 people on the executive committee. I've been 9 years, taking a break after this year. But I'm going to give away some of the deep, dark secrets of the behind-the-scenes stuff and show you some pictures, and we're going to find Waldo in a few of them. So this is the ride. This is the temporary structure that's built just for IBC. IBC is the 2nd largest show. There's actually the International Systems Integration Show that happens in February. That's actually about 20,000 people more attendance, and they don't use that extra building. The thing that really bugged me, and I wrote a letter to the IBC organizers, is because of all the setbacks for security, this is one of the rainiest IBCs we've ever had, so you had to go at least 250 yards or longer to get from any point that you could be dropped off with no covering. So when it was pouring rain, we all had to run for the only entrance, which was around that big temporary structure known as Hall 14. This was record attendance. Now, those of us who are cynical about NAB's attendance, they're lying. They very scrupulously manage the attendance management and recording at IBC. You're flagged and clicked at many places. So that was the 57,669. It was, as many people pointed out, the 50th anniversary of IBC. SMPTE is owned by 6 non-for-profit entities. So I have, as the finance VP of SMPTE, I have a very tiny part of an 11% share in the financial side of the organization of the show. So SMPTE owns an 11% share in IBC, and IBC accounts for 1/4, and we're very glad we have that revenue. 1/4 of all SMPTE gross revenue comes from IBC. So the show is entirely not for profit. We're actually in the process of reorganizing it as a proper business corporation. It's an unlimited partnership now. So these are the 6 companies. You'll see some familiar names there: SCTE, SMPTE, IBM, etc. So basically it is held as an annual event. They collect all the money and they distribute it throughout the course of a year. I'm on some sort of auto advance here. It isn't difficult to find your way around the RAI. It's impossible. And after 19 or 20 years and actually going to multiple trade shows, it is a complex, there just is no such thing as a big convention center in Europe. So that is actually the map. I still get lost in it. There's all sorts of shortcuts and back rooms. They've taken out cafeterias. They've actually even scavenged space over the past year and other things. So this is where you got dropped off if you were in the cab line and you had to run about 250 yards in pouring rain around the rest of that corner. Do you know how I would take this out of auto advance? I don't think so. Okay, I'll just keep going back. So some main themes of IBC 2017. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to point to some of them and talk about a few of them. Certainly everything to do with IP was the most prevalent. Software, migration of hardware to software, and the virtualization of that software. Artificial intelligence that I thought was a bit of a joke, which I came away thinking was now a very serious new trend in automated many things, automated production and asset management. UHD and HDR, I think, are now more mainstream topics versus emerging topics. They're fairly well known. HDR is still, and 4K are still highly misused terms. HDR meaning mostly HDR color transform versus anything absolute in the color space. One thing that I was surprised at, just when you thought SDI was completely dead, I was surprised how many people answered Mike's letter from the various OB people and came out with single strand 12 gig infrastructure. There were quite a few new product introductions. You guys were talking about when SMPTE 2110 was to be released. They actually timed it for the start of that Monday seminar. That the press release went out, so it was the press release for releasing it. I didn't try to download it, and I don't know if I presume it was there.
So I have to clarify, but I'm
okay.
Here. The documents have not been published, which is the formal SMPTE release. However, we needed to invent a word so we could at IBC say these documents are, and the word we picked was approved.
Okay.
They will be published. They're in the publication pipeline, but there's due process required.
Okay.
So thus. But you know what? Even if the SMPTE conference is 2 weeks, we won't have them published. We're going to have to say they're approved. So close. So I guess we release fake news.
But there was a press release that was timed with that. IBC was notable for what wasn't there. We're really at a once-in-a-lifetime turning point in the industry and the technology of the industry. Frankly, most vendors and some vendors canceled their introductory meetings and whatnot because they hadn't actually done much since NAB. Because everybody sees that we're in the twilight of SDI, dedicated hardware, dedicated boxes. To a lot of people, we went to IBC expecting to see all the new trends and all the things I mentioned in the earlier slide, only to find out that a lot of key vendors showed up with just about their identical NAB booth, and even one that was hard to discern from the year before. So we really are in a state of flux. There are almost no introductions of SDI infrastructure, or at least none that were notable enough to talk about in the 6 speakers before. IP now seen as universally inevitable, but the business model for the manufacturers is still elusive. So pick your manufacturers. If you're manufacturer X, obviously there are trends to software, but it still is a very, very hard transition for the industry. In fact, there was a paper published last year that said that IP could potentially threaten about half of the footprint of the show. Well, we know we're going to head towards COTS hardware. Everybody's still wondering when and how to take that poison pill and migrate to whatever form of financial monetization of the transition to this new standard. There was also a general sense that the market in North America in particular has been slowing for the past 18 months. I make eye contact everywhere else, but even in some of the informal conversations, you heard about various end users who have sort of stockpiled budget, trying to avoid too much build out of new SDI infrastructure and waiting for IP. If somebody asks me later on, I'll tell you when I think it will actually be something we can integrate. Artificial intelligence. It's going to be the symposium topic at the annual technical conference, so it's our Monday topic. I thought it was just a fad. But I came away from the show actually having my mind thoroughly changed on it, saying that this is going to be an important, significant use of various IT technologies going forward. I see that there's basically 2 large threads. As we make tremendously large archives, we want to publish to many, many platforms as a metadata search and enrichment tool. And how can I sort through a really big library really fast, or search all the news that hit today without hiring a lot of people to read copy and all the rest of it. Artificial intelligence, there's a whole side of it that's emerging to do that. Obviously, the Watson example is the one that's thrown around. I'm not sure when and how people are going to deploy that in the broadcast or media facility. I'm just going to talk a little bit about it as a live production automation tool. Example, there have been various attempts to follow, the famous blue puck example of an RFID. Other people have attempted to make automated technology that will follow a pendant on a guy pacing back and forth on the stage, that will follow a puck, follow a ball. And it's interesting now that the pace of computing power in AI is it can actually learn the behavior of what people do, for example, when they're running around, when they're close to a soccer ball versus far away from a soccer ball. So what you heard a little bit about is the potential of where a TD could be replaced for many applications, and a lot of the infrastructure that Mike's company drives to a site by basically a piece of software looking at all the cameras, deciding the shots, using electronic zoom, other forms of manipulation. There were people talking about 98% accuracy, certainly good enough for second screen, secondary production. I'll just show you a couple of screenshots. For example, this is, and I'll disclose the bias, this is from EBS. This is basically an AI that has learned what people act like when they're around a soccer ball. So they have fed thousands of hours apparently of soccer into this AI, and it has figured out what somebody who's normally standing close to a ball looks like, what somebody who's at the other end, not when the play is in the other end of the field, and all the different behaviors can be isolated. And you can imagine for multi-shot selection, for multi-second screen angles, being able to do that with a certain amount of accuracy now, and then potentially even before it's able to make your absolute selections of what you go to air with, it might give a lesser TD 3 different choices of the most likely shots that people at home would want to see, and this is only going to get better. Similar to the way weather systems, if you know how weather systems have worked, weather systems have gotten smarter over the years by knowing how accurately they predicted or didn't predict the weather. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I realize in past years I've just shown pictures of everybody's booths, and they don't look any different from year to year or from NEB. So this is a future zone. The SMPTE people, I seem to have omitted the picture there, are sitting off to the side. Obviously, NHK was talking about their 8K. One of the things that I thought was missing from a lot of the IP discussions is how great a part the compressed formats like TICO, like Sony's low latency video codec and other things. Most of the focus, they were kind of in the background, but most of the focus was on real-time uncompressed. I don't know if everybody's aware, but Korea has till the end of this year to deploy UHD universally. So like there was actually a mandate and obviously getting prepared for the Olympics. So the Koreans were there triumphantly claiming they had gone to UHD. And some immersive holographic signage. This was one of the novelty displays that you could walk up and see the appearance of a badly translucent shark apparently swimming around. This is obviously what we've talked about, the IBC IP showcase. I'm going to go to the next one and advance to look. So obviously this is the Ames board and the group that it formed. So I think where SMPTE has come a long way is that in the dark ages of NAB 2016, SMPTE declined to attend the Ames news conference at the beginning of the show, and a bunch of us eventually convinced them to do that. I understood there were about 60 manufacturers in the interop involved? 52. I point out how many people. There's 9 different groups across the top. You could arguably add to the development of the IP standard the IEEE. We've come downstream, things like 1588. 2059 is a frame-accurate derivation of the 1588 Precision Time Protocol, and of course the IETF. You hear a lot about the Internet Engineering Task Force upstream. I think what is big about this, where Waldo is here, is the fact that SMPTE and in the form of the JTNM has actually begun to acknowledge commercial trade shows as significant benchmarks. In my 9 years on SMPTE, it was about a year and a half ago that we started having the alcoholics realization that we had to begin to align activity with the shows. So the next slide is where we have the elephant in the room. Can anybody spot the elephant in the room? And we've talked about it all night, is the fact that AmLaw is an organization, really a technical recommendation organization operating separate. It was always presupposed that the type of activity that AmLaw is undertaking would get rolled into the standard. At the end, I don't know if, Paul, you were there, I don't know if you were there, Lee, at the end, we were all waiting for somebody to ask the elephant in the room question. Why isn't AmLaw the ISO XXX part of 2110? And the answer was, that's a really good question. I would also suggest that we are moving closer and closer. Things like HTML5 and a lot of the ISO 5.6 work is getting at least closer to a universal API-ish. One of the things that 2110 really shows off is the modularization of SMPTE standards. So if anybody can remember MXF, it was a really big standard. It took too long. It was too big. It was, 10 years. Came to symbolize 2 things that would never possibly speak together. Sorry, I keep going back to this. But anyways, the fact that we've modularized standards, I think in 2016 we did 50% more published documents than SMPTE had ever done in their past. And a lot of people owe that to the fact that it's become a modular dash something, so we can get part of it done and for the love of God move on. Yes, the SFP trend was everywhere and everybody's using them for both encapsulation, various conversions, codecs, etc. And finally, I'm going to say, every year at IBC, I see some things that are truly stupid, and this was my top list of things that made me chuckle when I went around. One of this was this immersive cave of very coarse, badly lit LEDs and very fuzzy pictures that was actually supposed to make me think like I was standing on that city street. It was awful, as was this wonderful thing called the Igloo. I didn't bother to wait for my turn in the 3D glasses, but you can see with a wonderful quality there that it wasn't very immersive. I couldn't believe that this exhibit was really, really packed all the time. But they were talking about by putting 4 UHD screens together, you could make an 8K. I don't know if you realize, but one of the problems has been with UHD and high dynamic range is that it increases motion blur. Some of the early attempts at 8K I've seen remind me of what's called a sticky plumbicon, if anybody remembers what tube the comet tailing and image retention is. So I thought this was really cute that they could actually take 4 lower resolution screens and probably overcome some of that. But like you were going to watch that and as a TV thing with a big X in the middle. And my favorite fun thing I saw at IBC was a supplier giving away a Ducati rocket bike. Basically, they were inviting their good customers to get a chance to win something that would kill them. And I made that comment to them, and they pointed out that you could get $15,000 in cash, which was actually far less than the price of the Ducati. Anyways, that was, I thought that'd be fun to finish off the...
So if I could ask our presenters to come up to the front and have a seat in no particular order, we'll do a little Q&A. And while they're doing that, I'll just follow on something Paul said, because this problem of standardized non-standards has been a SMPTE problem for a long time. We typically write normative standards, which are rigidly specified documents. There's no room to wiggle in them. And then the next step down is something called a recommended practice, which can be normative, but typically isn't so much. Below that's an engineering guideline. So what do we do with something like an API revision 3.0 for some new thing? So these other organizations like AMWA are coming up with these specifications, which are valuable and useful, but they're dynamic. They keep changing. They're being developed using agile processes, and version 3 may or may not provide certain compatibilities with version 2 and so on. And SMPTE cannot standardize something that keeps moving, right? ISO standards and normative standards are things like nuts and bolts. They're threads. You got to write it down and print it. So we're looking at a new class of document type, which we haven't named yet, but the idea is a document which is not as normative as a real ISO standard, not as vague as an engineering guideline or recommended practice, and allows us to take something like ISO, NMOS, ISO 4, revision 2, point to that in a GitHub repository somewhere and say, this is a SMPTE, won't say a name of a document because we don't have one yet, but a SMPTE document that points at that as a thing. And so everybody who wants to use that kind of thing, if you use that thing that we're pointing at, we guarantee interoperability. So SMPTE is looking at expanding the suite of communication tools we have.
And I'll point out that we launched with the DPP, the first of what are going to be, the placeholder name that may stick is just SMPTE specifications. So what Paul was saying, we have to be able to freeze and isolate what that was that somebody was speccing in case the commercial entity, whatever takes going. So what happened is SMPTE has had a format called the IMF, the Interoperable Master File Format. It has kind of been languishing for lack of the typical broadcast codecs. So there was a long negotiation with the Digital Production Partnership to bring most of their described file formats into the IMF umbrella. So that hopefully we'll be making further inroads to the specification.
The interesting thing about IMF is it's not actually languishing anywhere in the cinema industry. It is in television industry. Cinema industry, of course, wrote it for themselves, and they're using it everywhere. The idea of IMF in a nutshell is you store the highest copy quality of everything you have, video, audio, metadata, everything, scripts, shot lists, script assistant name, everything goes in a database. And then when you want to print out a copy of that for a specific purpose, you do two things. You tell it what you want to print out and in what formats you want to print that stuff out in. And it allows cool things like you can print out a movie for airplane rendering and also specify to replace the airplane crash sequence with some other happy sequence for the airplane version only. No joke, this is a big cost in the cinema industry, is targeting things for different audiences. taking the swear words out of beep, productions and so on. IMF does that.
Not to get off topic, the problem they have with IMF is Disney and Netflix were the two big people pushing it, and they were using Apple ProRes, which wasn't a described codec, so the two big components were.
Anyway, he said the word, we're looking at calling them SMPTE specifications. They're not normative standards, they're not ISO documents, but there's something that an implementer can hang their hat on, say, okay, SMPTE's behind this, they've done some diligence, I can move forward and use this with some confidence, as can a customer. Interesting thing, too, is customers typically don't use standards. We use equipment based on standards. Vendors build the stuff. We, as users, use it without much knowledge about the standard. However, with these APIs now becoming available, everybody writes code in their house now. You write it for whatever application, whatever show, doodads you're putting together. We can now write equipment control APIs using these, which means you can now write your own in-house app to do some very specific thing that you do and use an industry standard API to get down to the broadcast equipment and resources that presently are insulated by this layer of control that you buy from some vendor or another. Anyway, I digress. Any questions for first of all, our wonderful panel, thank you all so much. You came in, did a great job, and I think I got myself a whole bunch of things I didn't see at IBC I've learned about, and I want to thank you all very much for your wonderful presentations. Any questions for our presenters? And I have some if no one does.
Tony Howard. Question for Mike, to enlarge on something that Paul mentioned. The 12 gig connectivity for uncompressed 4K, you said you saw evidence, you both said you saw evidence at the show of growing adoption of this single coax interface. Can you just enlarge on what you saw? Because I want to bug, I want to bug our guys if they ought to be putting it on our boxes as well.
Yeah, there's on a lot of different devices that we use in our live event world. The 12 gig interface was definitely much more prominent. Replay servers, some of the like router chassis, things that we would use in that space. It's an interesting dilemma. One of the sort of the focuses for our push towards that 12G link is, first of all, we find 4 quads just difficult and awkward to deal with. If you shuffle the order, any number of things can happen to be disruptive around that. But if I want to make an exchange, like in our current world, or just where things are in our evolution of maybe where we're going to be in IP, I don't know that if I create an IP infrastructure and I have to interface with another truck to share sources and resources, if it's going to be IP, that becomes very conditional. Now you have to, somebody has to apply themselves to actually sorting out that exchange of data. Now, there's lots of intelligence and programming that's going to really address that, I think, in the long run. But 12G, single link, SDI is very unconditional. If I present you with that link, here's a copy of whatever number of cameras you want to get a copy of, and without any other further interface, it's quite nice. So in terms of, I don't have a list for you, Tony, like in terms of who we've seen, but there was a lot of connectivity and maybe even more sort of adaptive conversion so that I could easily get to that space. One of the things that we did see is actually another sort of aspect of that, sort of dealing with things in a full frame single link is the benefits of HEVC encoding, which you guys are prominent in terms of offerings at IBC, and I could have mentioned it earlier, but the idea is that being able to work with 4K in a single frame format is a huge benefit. It kind of gets us back to much closer to the model that we're accustomed to with HD.
I did see we now support 12G on signed by makers. Net do support 12G.
Good. So just to kick in on some of the history with that, as you mentioned, the Koreans had to go basically UHD. That was mandated. They were supposed to actually be on air last February, and because of that, they did some trials in IP a year before that. So IP wasn't really ready at that point. So basically, the KBS and NBC decided, we've got to go 12G, no option. So there were a lot of domestic manufacturers in Korea that did 12G. Belden came out with a new cable. for 12G, although we're still limited lengthwise. That's kind of where that propagated into. Obviously, people couldn't be dealing with quad length the whole time. Ultimately, on a go-forward basis, pretty well everybody that I've been talking to is looking at IP for 4K and using possibly T-code or something to that effect to keep it within the appropriate bandwidth.
Thank you very much.
It'll be interesting to see whether they go ahead and make the 24 gig. There was one version of the JT&M chart that showed it stopping at 12, SPI stopping at 12. And it was more vague on the other one.
Well, so this is the reason 6 hasn't taken off. 4K at 30 frames per second is a non-starter. Nobody's going to watch it. It's 30 frames per second, right? There's no huge value add. That's 6 gigabits. 12 gigabits gets you to 2160p 60. Okay, so now 60 FPS, 4K, that's not too bad. 24 gigabits doesn't get you anything good except 120 FPS at 4K. Probably that's not a starter, but you need to go 4 times to get to 8K, right? So 24 gigs like 6, I personally think is just turkey town. Not every, integer multiple of something is a good thing, as may be the case here. For those who maybe aren't deep in this nonsense, the problem with 4K is it's 12 gigabits or a little bit under, which will not fit on a 10 gigabit Ethernet fiber, which is the commodity speed right now for Ethernet fibers. Thankfully, 25 is rapidly coming down in price, so that problem is going to go away. So the use of compression codecs in IP domain for 4K is going to be a short-lived window, I personally think. Anyway, any other questions for our presenters? I'll threaten you again because I have a couple if you don't. Yeah, go ahead.
Based on what you saw at IBC, what is your opinion? What will be the next broadcast format in Europe? UHD or HDR?
So UHD without HDR versus HD with HDR, is that your choices?
Yes, UHD or HD with HDR.
Oh, okay. I have an opinion.
What format will be?
I don't think there's a leader. Most people will tell you that 3 gig HDR looks better than the wasting bits on the resolution than 12 gig UHD. That's I don't know what you guys think.
So at HPA, 2 different people spoke to this, and forget who from CBS, might have been Bob Ross, but he said, well, we're studying UHD and we're studying HDR and we're studying all this stuff. We're studying it. And Rich Riddell from Fox stood up. He said, yeah. And he said, this 4K stuff, we're not going there. We're going to do HDR over 2K. We're waiting for 8K. Done. So there's 2 ways to look at the universe. One is to assess and analyze and be known as the time that land forgot. And the other is to say, yeah, we see which looks better. We're going for it. So that's the current trend that ESPN has picked. Fox has picked. And for better or for worse, Fox is a big customer.
But, everybody forgets that UHD could potentially allow variable resolution and variable frame rates.
That allows lots of stuff.
There's a lot of tricks that could really bring up.
Right, except we don't do any of it.
One of the things I was just talking with colleagues from HBS who produce the FIFA soccer and stuff, their recent Confederation Cup coverage actually included a large deployment of both.
Night, everybody. That's fine, buddy.
Include a large deployment of cameras in both UHD and HDR as a parallel production to the venues that they're covering for Confederation Cup, and that's with an eye towards moving forward in both of those fronts. That's more on the European side. I know and I'm aware that U.S. infrastructure just can't support it the same way, and so there is a lot more sentiment, not necessarily for 4K, but for HDR in the U.S. market.
Right. That was another interesting side to this. For the home market, 4K sets are the thing. You can't really buy an HD set easily anymore. HDR 4K sets are a different problem, but a regular 4K stream, not a problem to buy. On the other side of the equation, a 4K camera and 4K lenses are very expensive. HDR doesn't really impact your lenses at all, or imagers and nonlinearity or some transfer function of the camera, right? So it's a very interesting world now where the equations don't match up on both ends. I mean, it wasn't within all of our lifetime. The beam on the camera and the beam on the CRT actually scanned just about synchronously. in the studio and in your home, right? And today we're so abstracted, we have separate streams on IP, we have all these formats, and really we have more tools than we know what to do with right now in technology. I have a question about security. Everybody wants to do remote production, everybody wants to broadcast over the top, everybody wants to use internet contribution, and everybody's terrified of IT security. So maybe each of you could give me, or give the audience your thoughts on where's the sweet spot? How do we do everything we have to do and want to do in this new world that is so terrifyingly insecure? What's the picture? Oh, a hand up.
I'll take up with that. Well, frankly, the security aspect is obviously extremely important. But I think it does get overblown a little bit from the point of view of if somebody wants to bump somebody off air, they just have to turn their air conditioning system off. Hack through it. It's that simple. So, people get all jumpy about I'm going more IP, I'm more vulnerable. Frankly, they're not more vulnerable. They've had that from the beginning.
There were some interesting observations around the big three cloud providers, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And many of the presenters that were in Amsterdam said, if you think you can do security better than those three, then you are diluting yourself. There's no way that you can. So I guess the way I'd answer that question is, if you truly have to be in a remote location sharing content across large geographies, then using those big providers is probably the safest way to go. There was one quote there that Akamai, the big CDN provider, has 15 to 20 million hacking attempts every single day.
Cool.
Yeah. So add a little bit, as I said, one of the videos was mentioning about how the broadcast security is actually very similar to just general security. And there's lots of known ways to how to secure your network. There's lots of just make sure your password isn't set to password and a whole bunch of just like what seems like really silly things. That's how a lot of hackers get in. So, I mean, if people just follow already known security protocols at both the human, do your patches, follow all those basic things, the systems will be pretty secure today.
I'm not an expert on this, but it's never stopped me before, so I'll comment. I think a lot of it's getting confused in the sort of these elementary streams of traffic replacing SDI from what Stan said. It's the same old security problem. I mean, a computer runs everything in a broadcast automated playout scenario now anyways. I don't know where that vulnerability has really changed, and I don't really, with admission control and the way the whole IP standards works, I don't know what and or how you would ever go about hacking the elementary video stream itself.
Well, the interesting thing in other media industries like cinema, for example, the problem is less denial of service because they have a lot of redundancy. I mean, they have disk packs off the cameras in a vault somewhere. They can take into editing if everything else dies. Their problem is theft. So when the latest Game of Thrones episode was stolen by HBO, and now this is merging, this is actually television I'm talking about, even though Game of Thrones, well, actually, so there's our new world, right? Here's a TV show that's feature film grade quality. But theft was their big issue. They weren't concerned about loss of service.
I can comment on that after having worked at Deluxe.
Having downloaded that episode? Yeah.
At Deluxe, how they use their security is they use the air gap.
Right.
The entire production operation at Deluxe does not have access to the internet. Every computer that is on a production network, completely isolated from the internet, completely isolated, everything has to go through an air gap from a data I/O center to control any kind of media so that nothing can get access. Nobody can get access to that media. It's secure on its own internal network.
They also don't have USB ports on the front of any computers.
Yeah, all the USB ports are disabled on the computers.
How do you update the air gap computer?
Well, you don't use Windows to begin with. You don't update the thing every 8 minutes.
No, I think you have to look at, there was the issue with the U.S. and the Israeli guys getting together and hacking into Russia and in their plant there. And again, it was air gap, so you do have to be careful. Certainly, everybody preaches air gaps are the way to go, but then people do get sloppy because the way they hacked in is they hacked into the vendors, laptops that then went into the air gap and then had to do updates on it. So, nothing is that clean, but like I say, people can hack in now, so the issue isn't changing or going to IP. It's just you've got to become really careful what you're doing all the way across the board.
So I think we found a very interesting meeting topic for an upcoming meeting, because on one hand, sure, we air gap everything that's nice and safe, works for cinema. On the other hand, we want to do live, remote production, resource reduced, headcount reduced, truck reduced, distributed production environments, which require this very thing that is what we're air gapping. So I think that'll be an interesting future meeting.
And if you look at the Game of Thrones issue, that was an ex-employee that got together with someone else and decided to ransom it.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from.
Yeah.
That's an internal job. You can do all the air gaps you want. Internal jobs are internal.
So on that happy note, where we've now discovered a topic for a future meeting, I'd like to thank my co-organizer, Sylvia Fant. Oh, I'm sorry, do we have another question? I don't know, there'll be extra charge at this point.
Oh, maybe Sylvia has a question.
No, go right ahead, please.
Oh, come on, Sylvia.
No, she's getting a bow. Let's get the question. Go ahead.
What tendency did you see at IBC in terms of virtual studio technology, tracking versus non-tracking, and in general, virtual studio versus just standard studio with maybe augmented reality, because the graphics are so good right now, you even don't need a keyer sometime. So I'm just trying to figure out, is virtual technology is evolving or kind of getting into the different direction?
Big time. I'll comment on the audio guy.
How's that work?
That's actually why I wore this, so I could just have the floating head and mess with all the virtualized sets. For me, I can't remember the name of the manufacturer, but they had one demonstration that the focus pulling was affecting the focus of the CG. And that, to me, was possibly the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in virtualization. And once that happened, it's just like, okay, we're on the right step. Like this is a path to something spectacular.
We actually installed and maintain a significant network in Canada. Their news has been done virtual, second 2 generations now. Things you were talking about, the defocus and the way that a zoom can be feigned to look like a dolly in, keep everything in perspective. We actually did that in 2008 and have maintained that. We do some other work for somebody else sitting here for hockey things in virtual. I would say some of the non-tracking that looks at objects in the picture, that is getting better. It's still getting relatively limited use, though. But there's a company called Stipe, for example, that's well known to a lot of people, and they work in live by using the reference points in the picture itself. So you pick a reference point at the corner of the stage, a light or something. And so I'd say it's been evolutionary. It's almost like people have just discovered it, though. You know, it's been moving along pretty consistently for the last decade or so. It's just like everybody started woke up. This is a great idea for cheaper, faster, lighter production that changes up every day. Yeah, actually, I think it's changing. That particular one is leveraging a lot of what's happening in gaming technology. So I mean, maybe gaming technology is pushing it along.
So is your soccer explanation, all of those AI algorithms are from the video game industry?
Like even the Fox guys were showing it, or they were talking about specialty cameras, and they actually took from a virtual reality point of view. They've asked, if you're familiar with what's called now IBM 360, the Matrix cameras stuff, and they'll do a recreation, but now they want to push that right down to the player view, so it's not just this high up kind of lofty representation and circle the field. It's actually go right down to where now I can sort of be at the quarterback's eyes and look across the field. They've totally invented that image. It's a virtualization of just having captured that material off the field. They're experimenting with that, and the whole push behind it is because they are recreating that game environment and that viewpoint. They now use on some of their select games for NFL coverage 2 sky cameras. So there's actually one lower sky cam that actually follows the quarterback. It's right behind the play. The other one is like this sort of I don't know how many players on the field, but the whole field is very toppy kind of viewpoint. And again, it's a recreation of sort of what you might be able to get a viewpoint from a video game.
Virtual camera view.
One of the neatest things we saw there, which we weren't actually seeking out, was at the EVS booth, where they had a 360 camera mounted above, and they were recording a 6K feed on an endless loop. And you can pan, scan, and zoom at any angle you want from a 360 top-mounted camera. And if you missed an event, because it recorded the entire view, you could go back and re-aim the camera at a spot you missed. Right, so in theory, you could have multiple cameras covering the entire viewing space of the arena and go back to see anything you missed. And that was a wonderful little...
It's interesting to see technology that's been around, the kids have been playing with on YouTube for a couple of years now to arrive in our space, and it's all new and fresh because we finally discovered us in our old world. Another question. Oh.
Well, being a camera guy, I have to ask, do you see anything in the way of light field technology? I know they had a demo at NEB, not this year, but last year, that was more or less a secret. I found out about 2 days after it happened, but was there anything at the IBC this year?
I didn't see Lytro there, no. Don't know what they're doing. Talked to them at NAB last year, and they weren't coming near broadcast. I said, hey, you do a broadcast camera, that'd be kind of cool. They said, we're looking elsewhere, so don't know what they're doing. They need to make some money is their problem.
Hi, my name is Trish Tavis. I just had a question about the AI. Was there a lot of booths showing AI displays, and was there any discussion about like past the sports application, perhaps like security monitoring, over large crowds, stuff like that?
Yeah, Jim will speak to, I think, the database side of it. I just showed the visual because it showed better on PowerPoint. There's a lot of other uses.
Yeah, I did come across one company in Israel, right? And they were doing, as Paul talked about, where you could run, they weren't doing real time, but they were doing post-production processing of highlights. And through training, you could train any sport, right? If you want to do baseball, you can train it to do hits, catches, anything that a human can do, you can train it. Just took time, right? So it was application agnostic. So if you wanted to train it for a specific activity, security, you could train the system to do that, right? So their application was sports. They were actually doing the soccer.
I think a very large other thread is this whole idea that I've got very large libraries. I've got now many more sources of content. How can a human being possibly sort that out so that machines can go find you past clips? It's really kind of a part of the asset management thread. I think that's the other significant.
And any large sports production company has literally tens of thousands of hours content to train with.
That all had to be meticulously logged, or you couldn't find any of it. Right. So the idea is the AI could take off some of that workload right away.
And again, this is where the internet is helping us reach the future, right? Because this stuff's all over the internet. I mean, your camera will sort your photos on locations and places and faces and stuff, and database searching for content and essence-based characteristics is now common elsewhere. So we're now benefiting from what's going on out there in the big world.
The flip side is that you might end up getting so much metadata information about the content, it's almost not usable.
Well, that's curation, which is the next piece of AI, how you have it auto-curate what it finds, right? So cool. Anyway, that's it for questions. I'm sorry, time is up. Don't you get up yet. Our presenters are going to be around for a minute or two if you want to catch them for a personal question or a follow-up. I would like to thank Sylvia Fenton, my co-organizer, took care of all the details in the background. All I have to do is dance like a trained monkey. And I'd like to thank, of course, the board, thank Ryerson for the wonderful space, but most importantly, thank you, our audience, and you, our presenters, for a really, really wonderful meeting. Thank you all so very much. Have a good night.